Picture this. A perfectly polite 14-year-old child is sitting in their family home, and they're carefully serving hot green tea and traditional Japanese sweets to a visiting homeroom teacher.
Right.
The child is attentive, they're quiet, impeccably well-mannered. Like the sunlight is coming through the window, the tea is steaming, and everything just looks entirely remarkably normal.
Completely idyllic.
Exactly. But hidden just out of sight in that exact same house, purchased with money stolen from their parents' wallets, is a heavily modified Desert Eagle gas blowback gun.
Wow.
And it's just waiting. It is literally waiting to be used in a massive school shooting that will eventually leave roughly 50 people injured.
Yeah, the jarring contrast of those two images, like the tranquil domesticity of the tea service against the looming catastrophic violence of that hidden arsenal, is really the precise entry point into the sources we're looking at today.
It really is.
We are diving into a firsthand clinical and psychological case study of a juvenile school shooting. And this occurred during Japan's mid-Heisei era, so, that puts us roughly in the early 2000s.
Right, early 2000s. And what makes this source material entirely unprecedented? I mean, it's the dual nature of it.
Oh, totally.
We aren't just reading a sterile police report or some distant psychological evaluation written by an outside observer trying to guess at what the perpetrator was feeling.
Right, which is usually all we get.
Exactly. Here, we're looking at a document that combines these raw, visceral, intensely personal memories of the perpetrator written years later in adulthood.
Yeah.
And it's synthesized with a really rigorous, high-level psychological and clinical analysis of their own dysfunctional family system.
It's incredible.
It's literally a person dissecting the architecture of their own tragedy from the inside out.
And our mission today for this deep dive goes far beyond just, assembling a timeline of a horrific event.
Right, because analyzing the what of a tragedy without the why just reduces human suffering to, true crime voyeurism.
Absolutely, well said. To understand how a mind breaks violently enough to commit an act of mass harm, we really have to unpack the underlying anatomy of the environment that shaped it.
We really do.
So we are going to examine family systems theory, the clinical mechanics of something called the false self, and the devastating psychological impact of living in an environment saturated with unregulated weapons.
Right.
Plus the long-term, really grueling realities of complex trauma and recovery.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this and you've ever wondered how families that look perfectly fine from the sidewalk can produce such devastating outcomes, or how systemic emotional failures push vulnerable people to the absolute brink, this analysis is going to completely challenge your foundational view of juvenile delinquency.
It's a paradigm shifter, for sure.
For sure. So to understand the eventual explosion, we obviously cannot start with the day of the shooting.
Right, you have to go back.
Yeah, because a 14-year-old doesn't just spontaneously acquire heavy weaponry in a vacuum.
No, of course not.
The existence of an arsenal of that magnitude, it requires a home environment completely devoid of supervision or boundaries or basic safety.
Right.
So we have to examine the physical tinderbox this kid was living in, starting with the weapons themselves and this crazy piece of forensic evidence located right at the front door.
Right, because the physical environment a child inhabits is, well, it's the literal stage where their internal psychological trauma plays out.
Yeah.
You really cannot separate the physical neglect from the emotional neglect. And the sources detail a staggering, terrifying cache of weapons in this 14-year-old's house.
It's unbelievable.
The inventory goes way beyond that gas blowback Desert Eagle. The text specifically catalogs machine guns, handguns, a sniper rifle that was actually physically taller than the child holding it.
Wow.
And perhaps most alarmingly, a hunting crossbow designed with the tensile strength to take down bears.
Okay, I have to pause here because to anyone familiar with modern Japan, the idea of a middle schooler amassing this kind of firepower sounds like complete fiction.
It really does.
Like Japan is globally recognized for having some of the most draconian, strictly enforced firearms laws on the planet.
Right.
I know we're talking about airsoft and toy guns here,
Okay.
but a bear hunting crossbow and a sniper rifle that shoots with enough force to do massive damage do not sound like toys.
No, not at all.
What was the actual legal landscape of the mid-Heisei era that even allowed this to happen?
So the mid-Heisei toy gun market existed in this really dangerous, largely unregulated legal gray zone.
A gray zone.
Yeah. While genuine firearms were heavily restricted, the laws governing airsoft or replica guns were incredibly porous prior to these crucial legal reforms that happened in 2006.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there were loose industry guidelines, sure, But there was a distinct, really fatal lack of strict, legally binding restrictions on the sheer kinetic energy these mechanisms could produce.
I see.
And because the law hadn't caught up to the technology, it was common practice for users to perform heavy customizations.
Oh, like modifying the toys to be stronger.
Exactly. The community called them tune-ups or bore-ups.
Forbes, right.
Enthusiasts would go in and swap out the factory springs for high-tension steel. They'd upgrade the gas valves, alter the internal pneumatics, basically make these guns fire with massive flesh-tearing force.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they really ceased being toys and became what the law later classified as quasi-air guns.
Right. And the text provides this chilling detail that anchors this whole abstract idea of kinetic energy into physical reality.
Yes, the mailbox.
Exactly. The child wasn't just hoarding these heavily modified guns in a closet somewhere. They were actively firing them inside and around the home.
Right.
And the author specifically notes the acrylic mailbox at the entrance of the house. They describe it as being covered in, quote, beautiful star-like cracks.
Which is such an eerie way to phrase it, right? But that mailbox is a crucial piece of forensic and psychological evidence. Well, thick acrylic is designed to be highly impact resistant. It flexes.
Right.
So for a projectile to fracture it into star-like cracks, it requires a massive, concentrated transfer of kinetic energy.
Wow.
It proves, definitively, that the weapons in that child's hands possessed real, dangerous stopping power.
Right. So let's contextualize that power for the listener. How does the force required to shatter that acrylic compare to what is actually legally permissible in Japan today?
The contrast is honestly stark. Post-2006, the Japanese government heavily cracked down because they finally realized the danger of these unregulated quasi-air guns.
Right.
Today, if you are using standard 6mm plastic BBs, the kinetic energy must be strictly under 0.989 joules.
Okay, so under 1 joule, basically.
Right. And if you use heavier 8mm BBs, the absolute limit is 1.64 joules.
Got it.
Anything exceeding those specific thresholds is legally classified as a weapon, and mere possession is punishable by serious jail time.
Wow.
Manufacturers are now legally mandated to build in anti-tamper mechanisms that physically break the gun if a user attempts one of those bore-ups.
Oh, that's smart.
But back in the mid-Heisey era, a 14-year-old could walk into a hobby shop, buy parts that amplified a gun's power to 3, 4, or 5 joules, and just walk out.
That is insane.
Right.
Providing a distressed child with this kind of unregulated weaponry or, even just turning a blind eye while they amass it isn't just a case of a hobby getting slightly out of hand.
No, not at all.
It's the equivalent of handing a live high-voltage wire to someone standing barefoot in a puddle of water.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. It represents this profound, almost unimaginable form of physical and emotional neglect.
And the clinical analysis within the source text arrives at that exact conclusion.
Yeah.
Giving a severely distressed child access to weapons capable of shattering heavy acrylic and leaving them entirely unsupervised in a highly stressful home environment provided the exact physical means for that child to manifest their internal psychological agony into real-world violence.
Right.
It is a catastrophic failure of the fundamental parental duty to provide a safe physical container for a child's development.
Which logically forces us to look at the architects of that environment. Because a child cannot build an armory like that without the active or passive complicity of the adults in the home.
Absolutely.
We have to analyze the parents, the figures the text brilliantly refers to as the fake kings of a deeply sick system.
Yes, the fake kings. To properly analyze the parents, we have to view them through the lens of family systems theory.
Okay, let's get into that.
So developed in the mid-20th century by psychiatrists like Murray Bowen, this framework posits that you cannot understand an individual's behavior in a vacuum.
Right.
A family is an interconnected emotional organism. If one part of the system is sick, or if the foundational rules of the system are warped, every other member adapts their behavior to survive within that sickness.
Okay, that makes me think of a mobile hanging over a crib.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. Like if you pull sharply on one little wooden star, the entire structure doesn't just sit there. The whole thing violently tilts and spins and tangles itself up to compensate for the displaced weight.
That is an excellent visualization of homeostasis in a dysfunctional system.
Thanks.
The mobile, in this specific household, was profoundly, deeply unbalanced by the psychological profiles of the parents.
Let's talk about the dad first.
Right. The text describes the father as this rigid, emotionally detached authority figure. He demanded absolute compliance but flat out refused to listen to anyone's emotional needs.
Wow.
He basically occupied the space of an autocrat while completely abdicating all the actual emotional labor of parenting.
Okay, I can see how a dictatorial father sets the stage for dysfunction, but the mother's role described in the text is much more insidious, I think.
It really is.
The source uses a very specific Japanese cultural term to describe her, which is hapobijin.
Yes, hapobijin.
Literally translated, it means eight-direction beauty.
Right. And the concept of the hapobijin is vital here. In a sociological context, it describes someone who tries to look perfectly pleasant, accommodating, and flawless to everyone from every conceivable angle.
So like chronic, pathological people-pleasing?
Exactly. The text notes she operated on a strict policy of peace at any price.
Oh, wow.
She would actively ignore glaring behavioral issues, sweep the child's obvious distress under the rug, and project this pristine public image just to maintain a superficial facade of domestic harmony.
So the system is governed by a father who refuses to listen and a mother who refuses to acknowledge that anything is even wrong in the first place.
Yes.
But the text introduces a massive destabilizing factor into this already fragile mix, right?
Yes, the younger sibling.
Right, a younger sibling with a severe disability. And the sources note that the mother would frequently hold this younger brother tightly and just weep over his condition.
Right. And this is where the family system transitions from merely dysfunctional to actively toxic for the 14-year-old subject.
How so?
Well, the mother's intense, emotionally enmeshed focus on the younger, disabled sibling absorbed all the available emotional oxygen in the house.
Ah, crazy.
This inadvertently cast the older child into a very specific, clinically recognized role. In family systems literature, this is known as the invisible child, or frequently the scapegoat.
Oh, man. So the system essentially demands that the older child cease to exist emotionally.
Exactly.
Since all the parental energy is consumed by the father's ego and the mother's anxiety over the younger sibling, the 14-year-old is required to have no needs, no problems, and no voice.
That's spot on. The implicit rule communicated to the older child is basically, your needs are a burden that this system cannot bear, therefore you must not have them.
That is agonizing. And to explain this dynamic, the clinical analysis in the source text draws a direct, striking parallel to a completely unexpected piece of pop culture.
Right, Attack on Titan.
Attack on Titan. I mean, I did not expect that.
It's such a brilliant metaphor, though.
It really is. For listeners unfamiliar with the specific narrative arc of Attack on Titan, there's a pivotal storyline involving a character named Erwin Smith.
Right.
He's a military commander protecting humanity inside a walled city. And Erwin discovers this devastating truth. The king, sitting on the throne like the ultimate authority of their society, is a fake.
Right, a literal puppet.
Exactly. He's installed by a shadow government. The fake king sits on the throne, he eats the best food, wears the crown, and projects an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority.
But when the monsters actually attack the walls...
He does absolutely nothing to protect the citizens. He holds the title, but he takes on none of the agonizing responsibility of leadership. He only cares about self-preservation and maintaining the illusion of the status quo.
And the author explicitly maps this Attack on Titan dynamic onto their own parents.
Wow.
They are the fake kings of the household. They hold the societal titles of mother and father. They aggressively demand the respect, the obedience, and the social standing that comes with those titles. But they have entirely abandoned the actual, difficult, messy responsibilities of the throne, which, involves nurturing, protecting, and emotionally regulating their children.
Wow.
They care only for their hepobijin public image, and they leave the real suffering and the labor of surviving entirely to their children.
When we place a 14-year-old inside that metaphorical walled city, the implications are absolutely terrifying.
They really are.
Living under fake kings means you're surviving in a totalitarian state where your very existence, your natural pain, and your developmental needs are treated as acts of treason against the ruling authorities.
Exactly. Treason.
There are no rules based on love, growth, or safety. The only law of the land is, do not disturb the illusion.
Right. And viewing the environment through that specific lens radically shifts our understanding of the tragedy itself.
Yeah.
The clinical analysis argues something really profound here. The school shooting was not a spontaneous act of malice by an inherently evil child.
Right, it wasn't just random.
No. In the warped logic of this deeply sick family system, the violence was a desperate, explosive coup d'etat.
A coup d'etat, wow.
It was a violent rebellion against the fake kings. When a child's screams are entirely silenced by their environment, Violence becomes their only available vocabulary.
Yeah.
The shooting was the only method the child could conceptualize to shatter the illusion, tear down the walls, and prove to the world, I exist. I am here, and I am in unimaginable pain.
Because the silence in that house was so deafening that the child had to use heavy artillery just to break it.
Yeah, it's a haunting way to put it, but it's true.
But dysfunction of that magnitude, I mean, it cannot be perfectly contained forever. It invariably starts leaking out under the door.
Right, it always does.
And that leads us to a crucial, intensely psychological phase of this story. The quiet, desperate game of cat and mouse between the child and a suspicious homeroom teacher.
Yes, and this specific phase demonstrates the clinical concept of the false self being weaponized for survival.
Okay, let's unpack that. The sources outline that the homeroom teacher strongly suspected something was horribly wrong.
Because of the behavior at school.
Right. The 14-year-old was exhibiting severe escalating behavioral issues in the outside world. The text points out that the child was deemed such a problem child that almost every single high school in their prefecture had already preemptively refused to admit them.
Which is a massive, flashing red siren.
Massive.
The child is subconsciously broadcasting their internal agony through their external behavior in the only environment where they might actually be seen,
Yeah.
the school.
Right. So recognizing those sirens, the teacher decides to investigate the home environment.
Yeah.
They begin fabricating excuses to visit the house on a weekly basis. They drop by and say, oh, I was just at a private dentist appointment in the neighborhood, so I thought I'd stop in and say hello.
Very casual, right?
Yeah, but while sitting in the living room, the text describes the teacher nervously scanning the environment, their eyes darting everywhere, desperately trying to gather any shred of concrete information about the family dynamic. They were actively looking for the source of the fire.
Exactly. The teacher is attempting a crucial intervention. They're looking for the obvious, stereotypical markers of abuse. Perhaps hoarding, physical squalor, or a really combative family dynamic.
Oh.
Something that would explain the severe dysregulation the child exhibits at school.
But the child's reaction to this intervention is incredibly complex.
Oh, totally.
Because the same kid, who is acting out so severely that entire school districts are banning them, undergoes a radical transformation the absolute moment the teacher steps inside the family home.
It's night and day.
Completely unprompted, the child meticulously prepares and serves the visiting teacher hot green tea and traditional Japanese sweets.
Right, and we really have to interrogate the mechanics of that transformation.
Yeah, why do that?
Why does a child who is fundamentally breaking down under the weight of severe neglect act like a flawless, quintessential host the moment an outside authority figure enters the home?
Right.
To understand this paradox, we rely on the foundational work of Donald Winnicott, who was a highly influential mid-20th century pediatrician and psychoanalyst.
Okay.
He introduced the clinical dichotomy of the true self and the false self.
Right. I understand the child is putting on a mask, but how does a 14-year-old actively maintain that level of psychological armor without cracking? Like, is the false self a conscious, calculated strategy at that age, or is it an automatic survival mechanism triggered by the brain?
It is largely an unconscious automatic survival response.
Interesting.
Winnicott explains that the true self is our core, authentic being. It is the source of our spontaneous desires, our messy, real feelings, and our foundational sense of feeling alive. However, when an infant or a child develops in an environment that is profoundly hostile, neglectful, or demands that the child be something they are not, like a family ruled by fake kings who demand absolute silent harmony, the true self recognizes it will be destroyed if it shows itself.
Wow.
So to protect that vulnerable core, the psyche constructs a false self.
So it's like psychological camouflage designed specifically for the terrain of their trauma.
Precisely. The false self is a highly sophisticated defensive facade. It is hyper-attuned to the expectations and demands of the immediate environment.
Right.
In clinical terms, we refer to this as over-adaptation. The child had been conditioned over 14 years to perfectly mimic whatever the fake kings required to avoid emotional punishment.
And to maintain the mother's Hapo-Bayesian illusion of the perfect family.
Exactly. So serving tea and sweets wasn't an act of polite hospitality. It was a tactical survival mechanism deployed by a child operating deep within a hostile zone.
Man, the tragedy here is just agonizing.
It really is.
The teacher is actively searching the house for the fire, but the child has been trained their entire life to stand directly in front of the flames and hand out marshmallows.
Wow. Yes.
The child is fiercely protecting the very system that is actively destroying them.
And the architecture of the false self is exactly why the teacher's intervention ultimately failed.
Because they couldn't see past the mask.
Right. The teacher was looking for overt signs of trauma. Instead, they were met with steaming tea, delicate sweets, a polite child, and a smiling, accommodating Hapobesian mother.
Right.
The family system's defensive wall of superficial harmony completely neutralized the outside help. It is a textbook, chilling example of how deeply dysfunctional families naturally repel intervention. The system prioritizes protecting its sickness over healing its members.
And because that intervention failed, the pressure cooker of the home environment was left completely sealed.
Until it exploded.
Until it exploded. The temperature kept rising until it inevitably exploded. The child takes the stolen, heavily modified Desert Eagle to school, resulting in the mass shooting that injured roughly 50 people.
Yes.
But what I found to be the absolute most chilling revelation in the source material is that the true psychological devastation, the specific moment that fundamentally, irreversibly fractured the subject's mind, didn't actually occur during the chaos of the shooting itself.
No, it didn't.
It happened in the cold, calculated aftermath.
Right, because the aftermath of the shooting strips away the final layers of the parents' facade, revealing the ultimate, unvarnished cruelty of the family system.
The text recounts this grueling, surreal apology tour that immediately followed the incident. The parents drag the child from house to house to face the families of the victims.
Right.
And at one specific victim's home, the father forces the 14-year-old to kneel in a formal apology.
And for listeners who might not understand the cultural weight of this, the text is describing a dojeiza.
Right, let's explain that.
It is a traditional Japanese posture of the deepest possible apology, submission, or supplication. You are kneeling directly on the ground, bowing forward until your forehead is pressed completely against the floor.
Right.
It is an act of total physical and social surrender.
And while the child is locked in this incredibly vulnerable, submissive posture, face pressed to the floor, the father begins to violently punch the child in the back of the head.
It's horrific.
And he doesn't stop. He hits the child repeatedly, driving their head down over and over until the situation becomes so grotesque that the victim's own parents, the very people whose children were just shot, have to actually intervene and beg the father to stop beating his child.
Yeah, the clinical interpretation of the father's violence in that specific moment is paramount here. We cannot classify this as discipline.
Right.
Discipline, even when harsh or misguided, is theoretically aimed at correcting a child's future behavior. The father's actions here constitute ritualistic abuse. It is highly performative violence.
He is using his child as a human shield for his own reputation.
That is the exact mechanism at play. The father is using his child's body as a physical, theatrical prop.
Wow.
The message he is desperately sending to the community, and specifically to the victim's parents, has absolutely nothing to do with morality or his child's rehabilitation.
It's all about him.
Entirely. The message is, look at me. Look at how seriously I am taking this tragedy. Look at how severely I punish transgression. I am fulfilling my role as the righteous authority.
Disgusting.
He is attempting to save his own social face and maintain his status as the king by physically and publicly destroying his child in front of an audience.
The betrayal there is absolute. I mean, the father is literally beating the child to protect his own fragile ego.
And this performative beating crystallizes everything the child has unconsciously known their entire life.
Yeah.
In that agonizing moment, absorbing blows to the back of the head while the victim's parents watch in sheer horror, the child receives the final, undeniable proof of their existence within the family structure.
Which is what?
I am not a human being to my parents. I am an object. I am a tool to be used, battered, and discarded solely to protect their public image.
And the destruction of the child's psyche deepens immediately after this. Because following the performative apology, the victim's parents naturally and understandably demand an absolute severance of ties.
Of course.
They demand this family be entirely excised from their lives and their community. And the source text describes the moment the child processes this total social rejection. They describe it as a literal physical pain, stating it felt, quote, like being stabbed in the chest with a knife.
Right. That visceral physical sensation of being stabbed is the ultimate somatic manifestation of severe attachment disorder.
Wow.
Human beings are biologically, evolutionarily wired to require connection. We need a tribe to survive.
Yeah, we're social creatures.
Exactly. When a child is profoundly neglected by their primary caregivers, they will often subconsciously desperately hope to find some form of stabilizing connection in the broader society or community.
Right, like maybe a teacher or friends.
Exactly. But in this moment, the society has universally, absolutely rejected them because of the shooting. It is the absolute realization of total abandonment.
Man.
They have been discarded by their family, and now they have been exiled by society. They are entirely untethered from the human race.
When a human being is pushed past that ultimate breaking point, when they experience total societal rejection compounded by performative abuse from the very people biologically mandated to protect them, the mind simply cannot hold its shape.
No, it fractures.
It fractures. And this brings us to the chaotic night immediately following the apology tour. We have to examine the hardware store, the butter knife, and the shattered glass because it perfectly illustrates a mind in complete freefall.
Yes, the events of this night document the clinical transition from severe chronic trauma into an active, desperate state of psychosis.
The sources detail this terrifying sequence of events. The child, feeling they have absolutely nothing left to lose and nowhere to exist, goes to a local hardware store, and they purchase a knife with the explicit conscious intent to return to the victims' homes and murder the children in revenge for the social severance.
And this specific ideation represents a profound, tragic misdirection of rage.
How do you mean?
Well, the true source of the child's agony is the parents, the fake kings who built the unlivable environment. But the child's psyche is still too deeply conditioned by the family system to consciously acknowledge that the parents are the true enemy.
Ah, right. The system protects itself.
Exactly. Therefore, the overwhelming lethal rage must be projected outward onto the society that rejected them.
But the child lacks the nerve to carry out the revenge murders. They just cannot go through with it.
Right.
However, that massive amount of homicidal rage has been mobilized, and it has nowhere to go. So the violence turns inward.
Yes.
The child had brought along a simple butter knife from their own home, and in a moment of absolute blinding despair, they turned this dull butter knife on themselves, violently and repeatedly stabbing their own stomach and neck.
Right. And the physical reality of attempting fatal self-harm with a butter knife speaks volumes about the depth of the desperation.
Because it's dull.
Yes, and because a butter knife is a tool of domesticity, of breakfast, of family care. Turning a domestic tool into an instrument of self-mutilation is the ultimate tragic irony of the child's existence.
Oh, wow.
The family, which should be domestic and safe, is the exact instrument of their destruction. It is a raw, unmitigated expression of self-hatred and an overwhelming desire to simply cease existing in a reality that has become intolerable.
So bleeding and desperate, the child is suddenly discovered by the teacher, the exact same teacher who used to visit the house for tea.
Right.
The child panics and flees into the night. And the source text describes the child running away, and as they run, they smash roughly 20 panes of glass along the route.
Yeah.
But the most horrifying detail is that while they are bleeding, running, and smashing glass, they are laughing. They are laughing out loud.
Right. If we are mapping the architecture of a psychological collapse, that laughter is one of the most clinically significant details in the entire text.
How so?
Well, to an untrained observer, a person laughing while committing violence or self-harm looks like pure malice or textbook psychopathy.
Right, it looks like a horror movie villain.
Exactly. But clinically, we understand this specific manifestation as a profound state of dissociation combined with a highly active manic defense.
Break down the mechanics of that defense for us. Like, how does terror actually transform into laughter?
When the human brain is confronted with a reality that is fundamentally unbearable in this exact moment, the reality is I am entirely alone, I am bleeding from self-inflicted wounds, I have ruined my life, and if I am caught, my father will likely beat me to death.
Right.
The psyche has to deploy massive emergency countermeasures to prevent a total neurological collapse. Dissociation is the first step. It forcefully unplugs the person's consciousness from their physical reality and their emotional terror.
So they basically pull the fire alarm and evacuate their own body.
Exactly that. But the manic defense takes it a step further. It cannot just numb the terror, it has to invert it.
Invert it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It transforms mortal terror into a sudden, blinding delusion of omnipotence and euphoria. The laughter is a chilling, completely involuntary survival mechanism.
Wow.
The child's internal monologue, as explicitly noted in the text, shifts to, since I'm going to be killed by my parents anyway, I might as well do whatever I want.
Man.
The laughter is the brain's final, desperate way of shielding itself from the crushing weight of impending doom. It is the sound of a mind breaking in half just to save itself from the pain of reality.
That is just, it's incredibly bleak. The chase eventually ends, though. The child is tackled and apprehended, and that night, the father, the exact same man who was violently punching the back of the child's head during the Dogeza just hours earlier, comes to the child.
Yeah.
But the father doesn't yell, he doesn't strike them. Instead, the father begins to cry, and he asks the child this specific question. Please tell me, where did your mother and I make a mistake in raising you?
And this question is the absolute crescendo of the family's dysfunction. It is a masterpiece of emotional manipulation.
The child's internal response, deeply buried but noted in the text, is simply, how the hell should I know?
And that silent response is the only logical reaction to what is happening. The father's question is a flawless textbook example of what the anthropologist and systems theorist Gregory Bateson termed a double bind.
I've heard the term double bind used casually, but how does it operate as a mechanism of psychological abuse in this specific context?
A double bind is a deeply manipulative dilemma in communication where an individual receives two or more intensely conflicting messages, and the nature of the relationship ensures that responding to one message violates the other.
Right.
The father, through his tears, is explicitly asking for an honest, vulnerable assessment of his parenting. But the fundamental unspoken rule of this family system, a rule brutally enforced by performative violence and profound emotional neglect, is that the child is never, under any circumstances, allowed to question the authority or the perfection of the fake kings.
So the trap is perfectly set. Tell me the absolute truth about how I failed you. But if you actually tell me the truth, I will perceive it as an attack on my authority and I will destroy you.
It is an impossible situation.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, consider the sheer audacity of the demand. The architect of this broken, violent system is demanding that the 14-year-old victim diagnose the structural failure of the system itself.
Yeah, that's insane.
The father is attempting to shift the ultimate burden of responsibility, the crushing psychological heavy lifting of understanding the tragedy, directly onto the shoulders of the child he just beat. He wants the child to soothe his guilt by explaining the mechanics of his failure.
It is quite literally like an arsonist standing outside a burning building, asking the person trapped inside the flames to write a thesis on the chemistry of fire.
Exactly.
It is a profound, maddening, reality-warping level of unfairness.
It is the absolute abdication of parental responsibility, cleverly disguised as emotional vulnerability. The child's internal scream of, "How the hell should I know?" is the last remnant of their true self, recognizing the insanity of the demand.
Wow. This harrowing narrative forces us to look at the present day, because a story like this does not neatly resolve itself when the subject turns 18, you know?
Right. Trauma does not respect the calendar.
It really doesn't. Our analysis now transitions to the long, dark shadow of this upbringing and the grueling pathways to what the author calls exile.
Yes. Childhood trauma of this staggering magnitude does not simply evaporate with time or a change of address. If left unaddressed, it metastasizes. The defense mechanisms that kept the child alive become the very architecture that imprisons the adult.
And the source material reveals a deeply personal, incredibly vulnerable note from the author about the very process of writing this document.
Right.
While attempting to put this psychological analysis together, while forcing themselves to look back at the fake kings in the acrylic mailbox, the author admits to daytime drinking. They detail drinking to the point of actually passing out simply because the sheer physiological and emotional weight of recalling and analyzing these memories became too unbearable to hold while conscious.
And the clinical analysis within the text views this admission with profound empathy and scientific clarity. It does not frame the daytime drinking as a moral failing or a simple lack of willpower. It categorizes the behavior explicitly as self-medication.
So the body is still keeping the score, and the nervous system is just screaming for relief from the unhealed complex PTSD.
That is precisely the mechanism.
Yeah.
And we need to differentiate standard PTSD from complex PTSD, or CPTSD.
Right. Let's do that.
Standard PTSD is often the psychological fallout of a single, terrifying, discrete event like a car crash, a natural disaster, a single violent assault.
Right.
Complex PTSD, however, develops from chronic, inescapable, long-term exposure to trauma. It takes root in situations where the victim feels entirely trapped, such as a child developing inside an abusive, fundamentally neglectful family system.
I see.
The neurological symptoms include severe emotional dysregulation, deep, paralyzing feelings of worthlessness and a biological inability to ever feel safe in the world.
So the alcohol isn't the primary problem. The alcohol is the desperately flawed, attempted solution to the overwhelming problem of an inflamed nervous system.
Exactly. The pain of remembering the fake kings, the physical violence of the Dogeza, the absolute abandonment by society recalling these events, triggers the adult's nervous system just as intensely as if they were happening in the present moment.
Yeah.
The author uses alcohol to literally short-circuit the system. Passing out is a biological imperative to stop feeling the knife in the chest when the memory becomes too vivid.
Yet, despite the immense weight of the CPTSD, the text does not end in hopelessness. It details very specific, actionable lifelines for recovery. And I think exploring these mechanisms is vital for anyone listening who might recognize the echoes of these dynamics in their own history.
Absolutely.
The sources mention mental health and welfare centers as crucial public lifelines, but they put a massive specific emphasis on structured support groups. ACA, which stands for Adult Children Anonymous, and ACODA, or ACOA, which focuses specifically on adult children of dysfunctional families.
Right, and these specific groups are the cornerstone of the author's survival. And the clinical analysis explains the structural reasons why they work.
Oh, how so?
We established earlier that the original trauma occurred within a deeply sick, closed family system. It was a toxic community that demanded a false self. Therefore, the healing cannot occur in total isolation. It must also occur within a community, but a community with a profoundly, radically different set of rules.
So you cannot heal relational trauma without safe relationships. You need a safe system to replace the broken one.
Yes. The text refers to these groups as a therapeutic community. The mechanics of this community are the exact inverse of the family home.
Okay.
When an individual walks into a space like ACA, they're entering an environment where the totalitarian rules of the fake kings have absolutely no jurisdiction.
Yeah.
In these groups, the foundational rule is that you are not required, and in fact are actively discouraged, from deploying your false self.
Wow.
You do not have to be a hapobesian, a people pleaser, or a perfect host just to earn the right to exist in the room.
You don't have to perfectly serve green tea while the house is burning down around you. You are allowed to simply say, the house is burning and I am terrified.
And when you say that, the community does not punish you. You are actively encouraged to express vulnerability, fear, homicidal anger, and bottomless grief without any fear of performative violence, double binds, or sudden social abandonment.
That's incredible.
It really is. This process literally rewires the neurological pathways of the brain. Over time, it teaches the hypervigilant nervous system that human connection does not inherently equal pain or betrayal. It is a slow, agonizing, but ultimately liberating process of excavating and reclaiming one's true self from the wreckage of the false self.
The sources essentially frame this entire recovery process as a form of deliberate defection. It is the arduous act of defecting from a totalitarian state. You are leaving the kingdom of the false rulers behind, crossing the border into the unknown to reclaim your own emotional sovereignty.
Defection is the perfect metaphor. The child was, for all psychological intents and purposes, a prisoner of war inside their own childhood home. Recovery is not just about feeling better. It is the active, daily rebellion of building a life outside the walls of that trauma.
We have covered immense difficult ground today. We started by examining an unregulated desert eagle and the chilling physics of a shattered acrylic mailbox, the literal physical tools that facilitated a tragedy.
Right.
We mapped the deeply dysfunctional architecture of a family ruled by fake kings, parents who valued the brittle illusion of social harmony over the desperate reality of their child's pain.
Yes.
We analyzed the neurological toll of the false self, weaponized to keep suspicious outsiders at bay, leading to a massive violent rupture.
We did.
We witnessed a total psychological collapse fueled by ritualistic performative abuse and the maddening logic of double binds, finally ending on the slow, deliberate path to reclaiming one's humanity through the safety of a therapeutic community.
It is an incredibly dark journey into the extremes of human suffering, but it is deeply illuminating regarding the resilience of the human psyche and the absolute necessity of safe environments.
It really is. I want to ask you, the listener, to reflect on the structures operating in your own life right now. Are there environments you inhabit? A high-pressure workplace, a demanding social circle, or perhaps the subtle, unspoken dynamics of your own family, where maintaining appearances is valued more highly than emotional truth?
Right.
Where deploying a false self is the daily mandatory price of admission, because the cost of maintaining those illusions, as we've seen in terrifying detail today, can quietly destroy a person from the inside out.
And this leads us to one final paradigm-shifting thought that lingers over this entire text.
Yeah.
If we fundamentally change our lens, if we start looking at severe juvenile delinquency not as the spontaneous, inexplicable act of an inherently bad or evil individual, but rather as a desperately coded, incredibly violent language used by those whose environment has systematically silenced their screams,
Hmm.
how does that change the very fabric of our society?
Wow.
How does it change the way we design our schools, write our laws, and support our communities? Next time you see a sensational headline about a problem child or a juvenile offender, I challenge you to look past the act itself and ask the deeper, more difficult question. What kingdom are they desperately trying to overthrow?
That is a profound question to carry with you. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly intense, vital deep dive. Until next time, keep looking past the surface and keep asking the hard questions.